Hello and welcome to Tech Cubicle on SAP. I am Daryl Griffiths and this is my weekly 180 where I spend 180 seconds on the latest techie news that impacts the world of SAP. At the end, I'll pick my favourite to review in a little more detail in the cubicle. In my SAP techie news this week, Azure announces improved throughput on standard SSDs. While standard SSDs in Azure can be used for hosting SAP systems, they're not supported in production environments due to SLAs and throughput limitations. The new announcement allows throughput of up to 100 megabits per second when previously it was only 60, which should allow some performance benefit to those non-production SAP systems, especially if hosting production-sized HANA systems in Sandbox. There does not appear to be any need to do anything, the increase is just there and customers should see the new throughput. This leads to one of those statements like, would you ever see such a thing in an on-premise world? Let me know in the comments if you think this will benefit you and let me know why that is, because I'm interested. Next, Salesforce announces availability of Einstein Copilot for Tableau. Just as Joule can be used with SAP Analytics Cloud, the Einstein Copilot for Tableau is there to help end users create usable reports using a natural language-driven analytics experience. I'm waiting for the upcoming My Copilot is Better Than Your Copilot cage fight. Did we ever get a date for that Elon Musk versus Mark Zuckerberg fight? Back to SAP Joule, the announcement on the application development blog that Joules AI features are now available to try out for free in SAP Build Code for a limited time. You can try out these capabilities until Friday the 26th of April. See the link in the description down below where you can get to the test drive tutorial as well as the video of a SAP CAP demo performed at TechEd in 2023, plus other useful information provided by QMacro. Multiple sites reported on the XZ compression library backdoor in Linux distributions known as CVE 2024-3094. This was a supply chain attack which didn't quite get off the ground because of a lone developer who happened to discover it before it went global. Luckily, it only got as far as unpublished Linux distributions, including experimental versions and early developmental releases. Subsequently, I've found that Red Hat Enterprise Linux and SUSE Enterprise Linux are not affected by this, since those releases are stable releases on which one would hope customers are running SAP systems. However, customers could be, for other purposes, maybe developers, in the same network as critical SAP systems, be running experimental early access releases of open source Linux distributions. It is recommended checking with the distribution source if those contain the vulnerability. I can't explain in detail enough as to how far-reaching the impact of this would have been if it had got any further into the supply chain. Links to the news articles are provided in the description down below. Lastly, an article on the Register talks about enterprise SSD prices skyrocketing because of the requirements for usage with AI. The article talks about an increase in price of 20 to 25% for Samsung SSDs, which I'm imagining could flow down into the hosting costs of large HANA database systems. That 20 to 25% might still allow a 10% saving from the new NVMe specification named Flexible Data Placement. I'll put a link to that in the description down below. FDP should be flowing into the hyperscaler storage systems soon. My favourite item this week is the XZ compression library backdoor in Linux distributions. I was out of the country last week visiting family in Venice, in Italy, in the rain, when this story broke. To add context, the vulnerability is known as CVE 2024-3094 and is classified as a 10 out of 10 in severity on the scoring system known as CVSS. After reading the first few inklings posted on the likes of LinkedIn, it became immediately apparent that this was a very serious issue and a complex operation of compromise performed over months and possibly even a year or two. It's not a simple thing to be able to compromise a software distribution that has certain safeguards in place and a development team that are in some way validated and trusted. It would seem from reports on this incident that the compromise may have occurred through some form of social engineering of a developer or set of developers in the development team for the upstream Linux utility known as XZ. XZ is a Linux utility used for compressing files. It's a bit like zipping, and is included in a variety of many different Linux distributions. It just so happens that during some Linux software builds, the build process compiles the XZ utility and inadvertently includes what looked like benign code files into the compiled source, except it wasn't benign code. This compromise laid the foundations for a mass hack that could have even compromised most enterprise-grade Linux in some way sooner or later. Luckily, only specific early developer releases or experimental releases of some Linux distributions were impacted. It's not apparent at this moment how many devices are running these early developer releases or experimental releases, but it could have been far, far worse. As a worst-case scenario, the backdoor would have allowed remote code execution as the root user on a network-connected Linux device. It would have been exploited by an attacker connecting via an SSH connection and using a particular client authentication certificate, which could have acted as a payload or even some kind of trigger. Reading various online reporting sites, it would seem that the only reason this backdoor was found before any serious harm was done was purely by chance by a single developer who was running a performance test using one of the compromised early access developer releases of a specific Linux distribution. Whether the downstream Linux distributions would have been oblivious to the compromise is unknown. It's possible that they have more rigorous testing and therefore the backdoor would have been picked up. Who knows? One thing it does go to highlight is that increasingly, open source and the free contribution of developers powers a lot of what is used today in enterprise software. The trust that is involved in that software development cycle is critical for us to have safe and reliable systems. As we enter a new age of AI-augmented software development, would an AI have noticed a vulnerability such as this, where the symptoms were only noticed through a compendium of different issues that the developer at the time decided to investigate? I feel the chances are slim that someone would have trained an AI to pick up on those items. Does this backdoor emphasize the N-1 strategy as a good one? I have previously suggested N-1 could be outdated as a patching strategy due to the rise in security issues being constantly found these days, especially things like 0 days. But companies following an N-1 strategy for their Linux releases could have potentially avoided applying a release or the latest release that contains a backdoor such as this. On the other hand, we have to consider how this scenario would be or could be worse in the future with AI-augmented programming. Let's suppose a Copilot suggested some code for a developer to use and that code was poisoned. Who is validating the training applied to Copilots that are creating code? Who is validating the code that the developer is using from a Copilot? Especially if that code is subsequently packaged up further upstream of a whole Linux release. Or, as an alternative, what if an AI is specifically trained to seek out and create these sorts of compromises? You just have to look at the complexity of this attack, and there's a lovely picture on the Hacker News site link, and wonder. Last thoughts on this? The internet's consensus on this supply chain attack is that this was far too long an operation for one nefarious individual to want to complete. There are suggestions it was a nation-state level operation, a very slow, precise operation conducted over many years. Make sure you're not exposing your systems to the internet needlessly, even with super strong authentication systems. As always, reference links are in the description, drop me a comment down below, give the video a thumbs up, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and always wash your hands after leaving the cubicle. Bye bye.